proverb for this station is that the river that forgets its source will dry up.
That's right.
So this is the origin. You gotta know your origin. You gotta have an origin story.
So do you know your dad as well?
Yeah, my dad and mom. Yeah, because they've been, I'm telling you, my family has been in New Jersey since the 1700s.
Hey there, how are you? I just want to take a picture.
Yeah, so glad you're here at the Skid Row History Museum and Archives. Right here is Charles Porter. And you know, this is the first of our Community Curator projects, and the idea was to grab somebody who has done a lot of profound stuff in the neighborhood and to encourage him to like lay it out in a way that could be turned into an exhibition. And so that's what Charles has done, and he's going to explain it. And Dimitri, Kadiev, or Dimitri, yeah, and his pals Joshua Grace and Ellie Sanchez listened to what Charles was up to, and they took some of the images and symbols from what he was talking about and made it into these, murals that are connected to the poetry that Charles also wrote for each section, which tells about a different thing. So maybe I'm going to let Charles tell you what's really going on.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Honored to be here.
yeah.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for showing up. So I think this installation is going to be here through July. And so John approached me and thought it would be a great idea. And I thought it would be a great idea as well. So hopefully it's the first of many. So I'll explain what you see here and just a little bit about my background. And then I encourage folks, if you have opportunity, to just check out what we have over here because it's a lot. And there's a lot of layers and a lot of stories, and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm gonna do my best to give you the narrated version. First, I would say that my concept also is trying to look at my experience and then the work that I do in the Skid Row community. So that's why it's here at the Skid Row History Museum, because I've been working in Skid Row since 1999. And part of what I bring to the community is this whole rich heritage. And so I want to start out by saying that I've been really fortunate and blessed to always have mentors in my life. And so my mentors help me to understand the value of learning, the value of challenging the stereotypes that the world places upon you. And so each station is somebody that really helped me and to move through those areas. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about each section, but the other thing I wanna show is how everything is interconnected. So even trying to figure out what went where, was a lot of overlap. And so some of the things, they just flow together. It's just, everything is not linear, everything doesn't fit into a box. And so, but the concept was to create puzzle pieces. So each section is a piece of a puzzle. Each poem is a piece of a puzzle, and it all ties together. So also at each station, there's a booklet that coincides, that has a concept. So there's a concept on the cover, and there's also a proverb. So there's layers, so it's very complex. So as deep as you want to go, you can go there. If you just want the surface, just look at the mural and read the poem. And that will be sufficient. But if you want to go deeper, flip through the book. Also, there's videos, just video clips of each station where people can sit down, listen, and travel. So I want to acknowledge also my beautiful wife that is in the room today.
Welcome.
Yeah, She doesn't come to many community events, so this is a rare treat. So you know how people say your better half, so that's my better half. So, and my good friend Fasui, Luis also, he's in the building, so we drum together. So we actually were in the park earlier drumming for Black History Month celebration right here. So I'm gonna start out in the beginning. So the first station over there was a Yoruba word. So I talked about the book. It has a little proverb and a saying. There's a word in the Yoruba language, Ipilashe is like the foundation. So you have to have a foundation. And the foundation for me is just growing up. The area that I grew up in was actually named after my family. It was like Porter Town. So, you know, people kind of joke because it's a real small, my wife has been there and it's small. Well, we love it because it's home. And there's a lot of history. So my father is working now that's another concept of erasure where people just change names. And so one thing that frustrated me when I was doing research on the area, all the names that the Black people have for the area, none of them were on the map. And I was like, why is it not on the map? It's like, and that's part of this story of this, the networks of liberation, is that people created their own world. Their own world existed off the map. Like there was a whole reality of safe Black spaces that existed that everybody knew. And they look and they kind of laugh. It's like, that's not what that place is called. We call it, that's Cedarville. Cedarville, where's Cedarville? It's not on the map, but we know where it is. So that to me just fascinating. Even Portertown, like where's Portertown wasn't on the map, but everybody knew where it was because it's where the Porters live. It's like, oh, it starts here, it ends there. That's Baileytown over there. And so every community kind of has that, but every community doesn't always have the power and the voice to define those spaces as their own, even though people occupy those spaces. So that's part of the story as well. It ties into our fight here in Skid Row to have representation. And so these areas that I grew up in, when I was young, I didn't know anything about the history. I just knew that I grew up in a Black community, very big family, so all my neighbors were I grew up literally in a village. Like my uncle lived next door, and my grandmother and grandfather lived around the corner, and all my family was just right there in South Jersey. And so as I started to just ask questions and learn more, then I realized people had been there for generations and generations, and there are 2 churches in the community that are older than 200 years old cemeteries, and just people had always been there. But one of the things that led me into doing more research about the area were just hearing the stories that the old people told about how this little small area, and if I step back a little bit, when I went to high school, like I grew up in the country, but then what we thought was the city was where my high school was, which was also the country. But for us, it was like, oh my God, it's the city. But you'll laugh if you see, my high school, it had like 600 people in it, like at the whole high school. But that was the big city to us. It's like, oh my God. So that was in Salem City. But I didn't know, like, Mannington Township, and where I grew up, the area, the locals call Bushtown. So I always talk about Bushtown because that's home to me. But coming from Bushtown, we always had to try to make ourselves sound important because they're like, you're from the country. And it's like, that was a bad thing being from the country. And I never knew just the rich history and heritage. And so that's part of the story I try to tell, and I just started asking questions, and people talked about these church conventions and these old festivals, and there's one particular, it's called June Meeting. And June Meeting, they stopped doing it. It's funny, I just had a conversation with my father, and I said, well, when did they stop doing June Meeting? Because I read a book and they said it stopped in the 50s, talking to people that were there. It's like, nah, it didn't stop in the 50s. I was born in 1950. He was like, I went to June Meeting. It's like it ended in the 60s, but it started in the early 1800s. And so it was a church convention. So part of the story in the first section, it talks about the Black church. It talks about the Black Masons. It talks about free Black people who we're just learning more about. And I was saying Henry Louis Gates has a series now on African Americans in the black church, and he's revealing some of this information. But there were a lot of free black people since the beginning. And there's another conversation about indigenous black folks and pre-Columbian voyages, because there's documentation for that as well. But there have always been free black people in this country. And so that also challenges this view, is that you have in your mind this definition of me as a slave, or a descendant of a slave, or a free slave, or something related to slave. But these people never identified themselves as slaves. They were always free people. And they always had their own belief systems, their own values, and they named the places around them. They created this community. And so that's part of this whole, how everything links together, is creating spaces where you fit in, that are welcoming, that are healing, that are supportive for you and your people. And so what I found out, that there was this whole network. People were coming to this little tiny town that I was like embarrassed to be from all over, from Canada. Like, people told me stories when the train, so this is before there was an Underground Railroad. So I didn't realize Underground Railroad was really like a short period of time. I want to say it was like maybe 20 years that the Underground Railroad as we know it existed. And it was called Underground Railroad because people saw railroads, but railroads haven't been around forever. You think railroads been around forever, so this is before there were railroads. And so to realize that people were traveling all over the country to go to church conventions and festivals, but to also know that for the black church, it wasn't just about religion. It was about and we learned that with Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason started some of the first social service programs, and she also started the first black church in LA. So it's all interconnected. It's how do we care for the people? How do we house people? How do we feed people? How do we help people get land and jobs? And how do we help people have their own space? And if you don't want to be here, how can we help them get somewhere else? And people were doing this before the Underground Railroad as we know it existed. And so in the first image, you see pictures just of South Jersey, of Delaware, Maryland, just how close they really are. They're all connected, and it really was one community of folks who helped each other. Even Philadelphia, it extended into New York, it extended further into Canada, but my reality was Delaware, Philadelphia, New Jersey. I didn't know much about Maryland, but then people would say, well, everybody came from Maryland. And so that's another thing too, is like when you talk about the South, like most of my people came from Maryland or Delaware or Pennsylvania. Like they didn't come from Georgia. On my dad's side, he does have people from North and South Carolina, but a lot of the old people in my family were from those areas. And so, and people don't know that there are also slave ships that went straight to those locations. They went straight to New Jersey. They went straight to New York. They went straight to Delaware. So a lot of the story of free black communities is linked to the Quakers. And so the area that I'm from, it was a Quaker settlement, but also at one point, Quakers were slaveholders. So that's another bitter part of history. And they realized that it was a contradiction for their belief systems, and they said we can't enslave people. And they made, at an early point in their history, decided to manumit the people that they enslaved. And so that gave people opportunity to have their own. So it was still segregated, but people were undisturbed. So you could have your own land and you could create your own communities. And then later on, so the Quakers played a role in helping people to live their life independently. And later on, you hear stories of their role in the Underground Railroad. But as the black communities formed, they had their own networks and communities. And so that laid the foundation for Underground Railroad. So I just that's part of the story, and there's information and books about that. And just part of how that connects to my story is that knowing that people created their own realities, and they traveled and they networked, and their experiences expand beyond the little small town that I'm from. But I love it. And like I said, we're fighting now to try to reclaim some of the names and put some signage up because of gentrification. So all the old black families, people pass away, the kids move away, myself included. But we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back, baby. We're going back. One day. Yeah. Walk my way. So, but all the families that are moving in now are white families that have no clue about this rich heritage, these ancestral burial grounds, and don't care. They're just like, wow, this is such a lovely place in the country. And so we want to do the placemaking and say this was part of what laid the foundation for the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad passed through my community. Harriet Tubman literally passed through the community that I grew up in and got her freedom. And so you see those images. Also, Howard University. So I just jump around a little bit. I went to Howard University.
Howard!
Yeah, that's right. Hey, that's right. So we in the house. And that for me was just an experience of expanding what I knew. So I already started to develop an interest like, well, how did all these black people get here? Where did they come from? How did they form these communities? What is my place in all of this? So same thing, I went to Howard and nobody knew where Bushtown was. Nobody even knew where Salem, the big town was. So I was like, I'm from near Camden. And I wasn't from near Camden. Camden is like 30 minutes away. I was like, you know Camden? Yeah, we know Camden. Yeah, I'm like 30 minutes from there. And so, but I didn't really know how to explain any of this. Later, when I talked to people, they were fascinated. It's like, what? You're from where? Is the town is named after your family? Oh my God, tell me more. It's like, you're interested? And so at Howard University, I just met people from all over and black folks from all over the world, the globe, and I had a thirst for knowledge and it just extended. One thing I do want to say before we move to the next phase is when I was younger, I had a really strong family, a village, extended family, but I always had mentors. So part of this also is I was blessed to go through rites of passage when I was younger. So the rites of passage gave me a whole nother perspective because sometimes you don't really listen to the people real close to you because they real close to you. They're supposed to tell you those things. And so when I have people that I really don't know telling me things about who I was and the significance, one of my mentors in the rites of passage also told me the area I was from has such a rich history. And I didn't understand it. He's like, oh my God, like this is a historic place. And it took me years to catch up to that, but I've always had mentors that taught me more than what I had access to. And that just fueled my thirst to continue to learn. And so as we move to phase 2, that section is called Awo. Awo it means like mystery. Awo means the hidden, like esoteric knowledge. And so that what happens when you leave the place that you're from and you go to a whole new place, you got to figure out what's happening here. It makes you question also who you are, what you believe in, but you have to find out the beliefs of the people that are there. And so this is my story of just working in Skid Row and working for social model recovery systems. So I do prevention work, I do community organizing, but our parent organization is a treatment organization. And so it's grounded in the 12 steps. I put over there too is this from my company. They have also some principles for the agency that are influenced by 12 steps, but it's an extension of the community work that we do. And so those are what we call core beliefs. So that's a little bit about the work that I do. But I also started to understand this whole relationship between your worldview and your belief system and your spirituality and wellness and healing and recovery. So in the image you have Bill W. started the 12 steps, and then Carl Jung, psychologist, talking about archetypes and getting into like ancient metaphysical principles. But you start to see like these discussions, like Carl Jung influenced Bill W., who started 12 steps. And so part of it was for you to get clean and sober and get off drugs, you have to have this spiritual experience. You have to have a spiritual connection. And it's a journey. You have to go on this journey to understand the world and your place in it. And so that started looking back at just other ancient cultures. Every ancient culture has that. And it was disrupted by colonization. It was disrupted by people imposing their views on people who already had a complete worldview. So cosmology, that's in the name. That whole section is dealing with the universe and why it exists, what is your place in it. And all indigenous people had a view of, why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I move from birth to death to rebirth? Like, these are things that people clearly knew. I was mentioning earlier in the Yoruba culture, you don't even name the person until you know why they were born. Why was this person born? What is their destiny? What are they supposed to do in this world? And so they don't name the child until the 7th or the 9th day. So I'm not gonna share too much information, but since I started, I'm gonna just finish this point. So in the Yoruba culture, the number 7 is the number for women, and number 9 is for male-born children. So if you're a female-born child, on the 7th day is when they do your naming ceremony. So that means nobody knows your name until the 7th day. For a male, the 9th day, because that is the day that we present this new child. You see the stories, images of people holding babies up, and it's like, I present the child. That is part of our traditional culture. But what happens before that? So in the Yoruba culture, on the 3rd day, the child is born. So they count the day the child is born. So the day the child is born, the next day, the day after that is the 3rd day. They go to a traditional priest and they consult the oracle to find out, why is this child born? And then they spend that time, they talk with the parents, they do consultation, they tell them, this is your child, these are their taboos, these are things they should never do in life. This is what you need to do to make sure that they achieve in life, and this is what they're supposed to do, and this is their name. So they give the name to the parents on the 3rd day, but they don't reveal it to the community until later. So I say all this to say that that's just an example. Every indigenous group has that. They have something like that where they know when someone is here, how do we help this person be successful in life, be healthy, be well? And it goes through until the burial rites. Everybody have elaborate burial rites. How do you make sure this person rests in peace? What do we have to do to make sure we bury them properly? And those are deep things. Like, as we get older, you start thinking about these kind of things. But the sad part is that some of these traditions are disappearing, but they tried to erase all of them, but we're blessed that they didn't. And so, we got books there that document some of this stuff. And so that section there, and then at the top, you just see it's a sky watcher, an African sage, and it's just, that shows you too, we heard of Carl Jung, we heard of Bill W., but there are many people you've never heard of. Their names are not known. And there are legions of people who were the wisdom keepers, who knew the mysteries of the universe. And those people still exist. It's just part of the journey. And finding, how people say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. But you have to go on a quest. And when you go on that quest, it's there. And you'll find out, like, oh my God, I never knew. But then you see the world differently. But the power in that is that it keeps you well, it keeps you healthy. That you have to do that. You have to continue to examine, who am I, what's my place in the world. And they say now in the prevention field, we say the opposite of addiction is connection. And so that's the same concept. What is your connection? How are you connected to the universe? How are you connected to, they say in the 12 steps, higher power? How do you have that connection? And so I just link in the fact that there are ancient belief systems that have answered some of these questions, but nobody took the time to ask the question, well, what do you believe in? Because people, and that's funny too, like people will study ancient cultures and they'll just sit there. This famous story about the Dogon people of Mali, and there was the book Conversations with Ogo Temeli, and there's another book called The Pale Fox. But the anthropologists that were studying them, Conversations with Ogo Temeli, I think it's like 28 days, where the elders in the village, they talked about what they believed in. And this is a deep thing. Like, these anthropologists have been there years studying people, just following them around, taking pictures, writing down what they see. And then I think they had been there like a year, maybe a year. And one of the elders said, one of the the members of the society told them, my elder gave me permission to teach you because you've been dedicated, you've been here for a year, so now we're going to teach you about our culture and what we believe in. And they were like, what do you mean teach us? Like, we've been studying you for a year. And it's like, you don't know nothing. All you're doing is you're looking at the outside. You don't know what we believe in. You never asked us what we believed in. And that book, Conversations with Ogo Temeli, is not easy to read because it's a whole nother world view. And it's just layers and layers of symbolism that's just, and it's been passed down. Nobody knows when it started, but just shows you that that there are people who have ancient knowledge and wisdom, and the traditional way you learn is through initiation. You go through initiation, what they call secret society. So that's why that whole section is Awo, means secret, means mystery. So people talk about in ancient Egypt, the mystery schools, like the Greeks studied there. So that's a whole nother story, stolen legacy. They talk about how all the Greek philosophers went to Egypt to learn, and then all of a sudden they discovered philosophy. It's like, okay, hold up, but didn't you go to school? Weren't you initiated in the Egyptian temples? So okay, I'm not gonna go too deep. Flip through the book. This section, so that's Zora Neale Hurston. So she also went to Howard University. She named the newspaper at Howard University, the Hilltop, and she was just a pioneer. There's a documentary now about her on PBS. Like, she was an anthropologist as well. She wasn't just a writer and a storyteller. She loved her culture. She loved her heritage, and she also immersed herself in it. She went through these different initiations to find out how people viewed the world and how to best convey that. And so in this section, we just talk about culture. So I think, what does it say, Asha? Does it say Asha? Asha. Asha is the Yoruba word for culture. And so that section just talks about culture, but just also the significance of how knowing your culture just keeps you well. And keeps you grounded, and it gives you the ability to navigate the world with fascinating stories about just Zora Neale just traveling the country. In the documentary, like, she had a pistol and she had a car and she would just drive through the country in like the 20s and 30s, like through the South. It's like, how is this black woman just driving? Yeah, she was bold. And then she also traveled to Haiti. She traveled to Jamaica. She went to other places to study African culture. And she wrote about hoodoo and voodoo, and she talked about just how people demonized those things that were really just black religion. This is black culture, this is black spirituality. You put these negative labels on it because you didn't understand it. You didn't take the time to ask, well, what does this mean? Why do you do these things? And so you see some of the books that I brought, they talk about that. Like, this is African culture, and we have to be careful because a lot of folks, when they hear voodoo, they just think devil worship, and that's not what it is. Or they think, oh, that's something negative. And other black people, I hear them say, oh, that's voodoo, I don't mess with that. I like, you don't even know what it is. What it is. What is it? That's the question. No, but what is it? And when you start asking questions, you start to see that there's a lot of misinformation and propaganda, because the United States occupied Haiti and did a lot of, vile things, and then they flipped it around and say, oh my God, the Haitians are eating babies. They're creating zombies. They're eating brains. Crazy stuff that Hollywood still perpetuates. Yeah. This whole zombie thing and people eating brains is based on these racist stories about what black people did. That's a reality. So this section here just talks about culture and how we just started. Today we had a Black History Month celebration, and so we talking here just about how we celebrate here. That was one of the first things I was really passionate about. We got to do a Black History Month celebration. So today was our 23rd annual Black History Month celebration. Because the Skiro community is predominantly black, and so, it only makes sense. And so it's not only that, but it is, equitable to include the experiences of the people you're trying to help. How you just going to not include their experiences at all? Like that, you're not really trying to help them. And so that's part of what that section just talks about, is how we celebrate, uplift culture. And then, and that's an image of my grandfather. when he was a baby. So one of the early books, you'll see it. And so just our work with the youth in Skid Row. So when we first started, we weren't working with young people, and they just started coming to our office and like, oh my God, who are you? What do you do? And so it's this whole story of creating a space to acknowledge the people that are there. So what I just mentioned with the Black History Month celebrations, like it's all black folks here. How can we not celebrate Black History Month? That don't make no sense. And so we had the young people, and they're like, well, where can we go? And they were telling us they didn't have places to go. So we created a youth program, and we started to just engage them. And they did, they started telling us crazy stories. They won't let us in the park. You know, when we go to school, they send us home because we got dirty uniforms, or if we're late for school, they send us home. And we're like, why would they do that? Police are giving us tickets for playing in the street, but we can't go in the park. And we're like, that don't make no, and it was all happening. And so we documented that, and we partnered with them just to make changes. And so we made some changes with LAUSD, and the young people from Skid Row. The homeless education program that LAUSD has now, when they started, they had one full-time staff to help the thousands of homeless students in LAUSD. So the Skid Row youth helped them to pass a resolution. It's called Access for All Resolution, but it was really enforcing the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which told the LAUSD they were supposed to be helping homeless students anyway. So it's like, okay, you're not doing this, but you should be. And we have some homeless students here that would like to tell you that you're not doing enough. And so now that program is big. I think they have I think every school now has a homeless liaison. So it started out from just 1.5 staff, and it just expanded, but it was Skid Row youth that did that. Amen. So this section here, it says Egg Bay. Egg Bay is like community. Egg Bay is a society. Egg Bay is a group. Yeah, so that's Franklin. Franklin got a lot of media exposure because he did a little documentary about the kids in Skid Row. Sad story just about displacement. So part of this story too is when they got more media attention, people had this view of Skid Row not being a neighborhood, a very terrible place for kids, and that was the first thing they said, oh my God, why are there kids there? Let's get them out of there. And so they had this whole Skid Row demonstration project where they identified all the homeless families and relocated them. So that's an issue now with where do we move the homeless. Even now, like people, when we were in the park earlier, we're talking about these sweeps, and they're like, how you just moving people without their involvement of where they want to live, where they want to be? And the kids were like, we like living downtown. Why don't you just make it better for families and children? And Franklin, and he was on Montel, the Montel Williams show. And Montel, that was a blessing too. It was his first time traveling. I flew with him to New York, and it was cool, but it was crazy because we were in and out. We went there, and then they were like, okay, we're filming in the morning. Okay, back on the plane. And but I was backstage, and Montel asked Franklin, and he said, well, why don't we, and he didn't know the political dynamics that they were literally displacing families. He said, why don't we just take people like you and your families, why don't we just get you off of Skid Row and send you to a better place? And Franklin said, you see, that's what the problem is, that people don't want to clean up the community. Like his clap back was perfect, and I was backstage like, yeah! He was like, people don't want to address the issue. They just want to get rid of the kids, but they don't want to clean up our neighborhoods. Like, we don't want to live. I mean, we don't want to leave. These are our communities. And that story is a story that a lot of people are not aware of, and some of the housing that we actually helped to clean up through nuisance abatement, it went from, like the Ford Hotel, went from family housing to single units. And so that's really the model for Skid Row, is this SRO, single room, and that's a service provider driven model. Like, this is somebody on my caseload, I know where they are, they're in one room, but nobody is a single individual person. Everybody's connected to other people. And there was a point where there were neighbors in the building that we were in, and they complained about the gas fees. It's like, there were gas fees for your significant other to come and visit you. They had to pay money to come see you at the place where you live. Like, and just these barriers, you can't have children. You live there, you have children, you gotta leave. Like, how can you have a neighborhood when you can't have partners, when you can't have children? So that's part of the discussion too about diversifying land usage. We need low-income family housing as well. So this section talks about that. It talks also just about the movies in the park. Elisa Ardunia in the building that helped us to start the movies in the park. And she worked for the, oh yeah, Kevin Michael Key too, rest in peace. Yeah, so Kevin Michael Key that worked with me and just asked those questions, and we have people like Elisa in positions of power where they could make things happen that were responsive to the community. Because folks were like, why can't we have movies in the park? And it was a simple ask, and she was like, why don't you have movies in the park? And it's like, cause no one has helped us to do movies in the park. And it was just, it just happened because someone had the will to do that. And so we highlight that as well. So now, and our first movie, and I always tell that story, it was full of police officers in the park, and the captain, everybody was there, and the community was like, well, it must be a movie for the police, cause that's all I see in the park. And they wouldn't go inside. And then the captain, he saw that, he's like, oh my God, we got too many guys, get them out of here. And then they only had like 1 or 2 officers that stayed, but there was this whole view of, oh my God, you can't have nighttime activities in Skid Row, it's chaos, like, no, that's super dangerous, people will die. And it's like, what they found out was people want to watch movies. That there's a community. There were people that came early to set up, there were people that stayed late to clean up. There were no incidents, and at the end of the first film, the officer was like, why are we here? It's like, I don't know why you're here. Yeah, and they stopped coming because they didn't need to be there, but that's just an example of this whole narrative and how we also, these safe spaces, they create, it addresses safety as well. So not just health and wellness, but safety is uplifted through community connections, through culture. So this section just talks about some of those projects. Also the refresh spot, which Elisa was also instrumental in. Yeah. Just an example of responding to community need. This is what we need. And I'm not taking credit for this stuff. I was there. I was at the table. I helped to facilitate the conversation. Yeah, Tom Grody's in the building too. I helped to facilitate some of these discussions, and I was there on at ground zero. So I'm not here saying I created all of this stuff, but it ties into who I am and what I brought to the table, and how I value these things, and how I value the community having a voice, having these safe spaces, having representation. And so you see that as we move through. And then the last part is just talks about what we continue to fight for. So we continue to fight to have Skid Row acknowledged as a community, to have the downtown community plan be reflective of that. So there's this, that's what's happening now is the DTLA 2040, they're planning for what's gonna happen in the next, 20 plus years. And we don't want, well, I talked about this whole erasure. We don't want to not be on the map. Because Skid Row is not on the map. Just like I'm talking about what happened with my folks, is like they're not on the map, but everybody knew where it was. And so we want to make sure that these spaces are defined and represented. And also this section talks about our fight to have a neighborhood council, to have our own representation. And that was one of the things that really inspired some of the conversations that led to the creation of the Refresh Spot, is if you had your own neighborhood council, what would you work on? What kind of things does the community want? And so the last section is and then the mural, that was a photo of me and Pete White and Tony and Pastor Q. We were in front of the mural. So this mural that disappeared because they were doing redevelopment, they're gonna recreate another mural, a Skid Row mural. And there's going to be a meeting at LA next Friday, 4 o'clock. So they told me to announce that earlier in the park. So for folks that are interested, because that mural's no longer there, Skid Row, city limits is gone. And so, but this was just a photo, what it shows is just some of the leadership in the community. And I want to say one thing about that photo that I've actually got criticism from. someone that just mentioned is like, well, how come in Skid Row all of the powerful voices are black men? Like it was a complaint. Like it's either Pastor Q or it's Pete White or it's Charles Porter or it's somebody. It's Kevin Michael Key. It's some black man always speaking on behalf of the community. And I was like, is that an OG man? I was like, wait, is it a bad thing to have black male leadership? Like. Yeah, I just found that to be odd, but this just shows just like in Skid Row, just that whole sense of folks fighting and I was about to say create justice. That's actually Pastor Q's organization, Creating Justice. and then LA Can, and just we don't always work together and collaborate, but the spirit of what we do is just to uplift the people and to make sure systems are responsive to them. And so we still struggle for representation, neighborhood council. So I got Bob Felipe, one of my mentors. He was in the park early today, drummer. So just his ability to, he's 90 plus. I announced him today. I said, he's about to turn 92. And he corrected me. He's like, no, I'm about to turn 94. I was like, okay.
He said, about 3 years.
But what sustains him is culture. He is a bearer of culture. Oh, yeah. And when he plays, when he drums, you see him getting younger and younger. And we're trying to keep up with him, and he's 94. Yeah. And so that is the resilience that we have as a people and how our culture can sustain all of these movements. And so that just ties into the fact that the struggle continues. The last thing that I talk about in this section as well, and you can flip through because I might have missed a few things, and I wanted Dimitri to also say a few words just about experience working on the murals as well. Is in this section also, I just want to highlight the fact that a lot of the successes, a lot of the beautiful things that we see were despite efforts to destroy everything about black people, where they are, who they are, what they do. And so that also, we create these networks of liberation. We create these spaces that are off the grid that exist. Even here in Skid Row, it's the grapevine. Everybody knows where everything they need is. They know where it is. You don't know where it is, but they know where it is because they've created these networks. And there was a book that I brought with me. I'm not leaving it here though, but it's a fascinating book, just talks about that, like these maroon communities, these independent, free black communities, and how a lot of the folks that at one point, like Florida, and that's where Zora Neale is from as well. Actually, her photo's on the cover, but it's called Africa in Florida. But what I want to say about that is just that was a safe space for people to create their own for a while when the Spanish were in control. So the Spanish told the African folks in this country, if you make it to Florida, you're free. But this was in the 1700s. There's two things though. They were like, you have to convert to Catholicism, A, and B, you have to defend us against the English. And so you gotta fight for us. And your other option is you can join the native groups. So you can join the indigenous folks. And so there are a lot of the Seminole nations were created because there were these alliances with indigenous folks and free Africans. But Florida has a whole history of these maroon communities creating their own networks. And when the Spanish lost control of Florida, these folks migrated into Mexico. They migrated into the Bahamas, they migrated into Cuba, African Americans. And this is like a whole story. This book talks about it, because I was like, oh my God, we got cousins that left. They were like, we out of here. Even the folks in Philadelphia at #1, in the early 1800s, there were thousands of people who left the United States to go live in Haiti because it was a free black nation. And they said, we're out of here. Free black people. They're like, we're out of here, we don't want to live here. So you hear of stories of folks going to Liberia and Sierra Leone. There was also political movement because this country didn't want free black people here because they were a threat to the story that I'm telling you. Free black people helped other black people be free. And they were like, we don't want that. We don't want that. If you're free in this country, we want to encourage you to go home. Go back, go somewhere, get out of here. And they were helping people. They were funding trips like, okay, go. You want to go? Where you want to go? We'll pay for it. But when the folks went to Haiti, the Haitians paid for it too. The Haitians welcomed them. It's like, come here, we'll treat you good. And they paid the first visits. The people from Haiti paid for black people from here to go and leave this country. So these networks extend throughout the diaspora. So that's a fascinating thing. But what all this leads back to my last point: reparations. So there's a movement in the state of California around reparations, and also in the city of Los Angeles. And these are serious conversations just about what can be done to repair harms done in the past. But part of the dilemma in that discussion is we continue to be harmed by the system. So what can be done to protect us from the harms, but to also make sure that the harms are acknowledged in the first place? And so there are a lot of discussions now around that. With the George Floyd death and the uprisings across the nation, there's all this talk about equity. But now, that natural extension of that is reparations. So equity is not just a catchphrase. It's like, what are you really doing to repair some of the damage that's been done here? And so that ties into these asks. There's other efforts here in Skid Row. I've said enough. I'll answer questions later as a mix and mingle. Dimitri, I just want you to share a little bit about what the experience was like. And I appreciate all the vibrant colors. So my storytelling came to life. It's funny too, because I was like, how will he do this? But I approve.
All right. Thank you, Charles, so much for everything. God bless you. The story that you're telling of pathways of liberation has been very significant to me all these years traveling around America and crossing the Underground Railroad pathway. But it's still happening now where people have to get free because there's so many things that are trying to enslave us and incarcerate us. So your vision of networks of liberation is inspiring, to say the least, where young people can find places that they can, they want to get educated, but also they don't want to go into debt, right? They want to get actually raised and lifted rather than shackled and harnessed. So when you talk about that, that's a big thing. There's networks, there's pathways, and there's sanctuary places, sanctuary spaces. One of the places I've learned and seen that the most is through devotional service. When you go somewhere and you volunteer and you give some time and some energy to the good cause, being merciful to people who are in a great deal of suffering, there's something that happens to us while we're doing it. It changes us, but it also blesses the people we're helping. So pathways of healing, pathways of education, and pathways of liberation. So thank you, all of you guys. You're all part of it. You're all a righteous and awesome, exciting part of it. So thank you for joining us and sharing the living, breathing culture with us on the streets of this continent, this planet. Thank you so much, everybody. God bless you.
Thank you. So I just encourage folks, walk around, flip some pages. Like I said, it's video. The installation will be here through July, the end of July. And we're going to have some community events as well, some programming, maybe some live performances and all that. So you'll be able to experience everything we're talking about. So thank you. Walk around, mix and mingle, ask me questions if you want.
I'll say something about the playlist because we're going to
the playlist. Okay, yeah, you're right about that. You got to turn up. So a lot of the work that we do, music is central to that, and so we even have, this is the original OG PA system that it's a little dusty, but it still exists. It still works. We're using it right now. And so when we first started really engaging folks in the park, we had this cutting edge technology which allowed us to play music at a loud level and also talk to everyone in the park at once. And so we had a captive audience because Skid Row parks are always full of people. So when we would go to the park, what we would do is engage folks there and play music. We're celebrating the community. We work for a drug prevention program. We want to make sure, you know, we got young people with us, so we would take the young people. And whatever you're doing, if you wouldn't do it in front of your grandmother, if you wouldn't do it in front of your kids, please don't do it while we're here. We ask you to respect what's happening. And we would play music. We had young people do stuff, and then, you know, sometimes we would just play music and nothing else. But the playlist was intentional to create a vibes and to play music from the diaspora, where people are listening to sounds that are part of this whole network. It's a liberation. It's like, okay, and there were times where I had to explain, you know, what is this? I don't know what they're saying, which is hilarious to me because I'm like, time out. Listen to the radio right now. Whatever popular song is Billboard's, tell me what they're saying. I dare you to tell me what they're saying. Because they're not saying nothing. It's incoherent. None of the words tell a story. It's not connected. And so music has been a powerful part of what we do, and even at the Refresh Spot, people, when they were talking about how do we create a hygiene center, one of the first things people said has to be music there. We want you to create the vibe like you do in the park. When we go to the parks and we feel that vibe, it's something that's healing. So everybody, we talk about culture, we talk about the deeper science behind this. Like, music is medicine. Traditional healers use music to heal people. And so that's another thing that happens with the music and the playlist, is that it literally changes people. And it literally, what is that? It stimulates the release of dopamine in the body. So it creates a natural high. Literally, people are feeling better and healing while they're connecting to the people around them and while they're connecting with this vibe. And it's just a whole, what's the thing they use now? Sound bath. It's like a sound bath in the park. We were doing that. And we continue to do it in what we do. So on the table right there is a little playlist, and I narrate some of the songs. I don't narrate all the songs because I took a long time. I think it's 75 songs on the playlist. And I was like, I do not have time to tell you why I picked all these songs. But there's a few stories just about why I selected those songs. So I encourage folks to just check it out. And I'm going to turn the music on. We'll mix and mingle. We good? I'm good? I can tap out. Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you. Because you know, people, when I started telling the story, they're like, oh my God, we want more. I can't give you everything. But I said, my wife did this artwork. She's a very gifted artist. And that's us right there.
Oh, we look so young.
We were young. I mean, we're still young.
No, I'm gonna vomit from this old color.